the fine art printing here, but the processes are similar, and we wanted people to know a little bit more about the story of Baltimore's connection to print processes. So without further ado, hand it over to Allison.
Thank you. I'm just going to keep both of these because then I can see what's ahead. And so, hi, I'm Allison Fisher. As Brian said, I run the Globe Collection and Press at MICA. If you're not familiar with MICA, it's the Maryland Institute College of Art, and it's every school has a tagline. We are the oldest accredited art school in the country, and we're here in the city. You may have seen outside of the fine art booths. We are the antithesis of, or the anti-fine art, I suppose, because Globe's job was to print it fast, print it cheap, and get it out the door. So I am going to put Globe into the context of a little bit of Baltimore commercial printing. Printing was Baltimore's largest industry for a long time, so you could write an entire dissertation on this. I pulled just a couple of businesses that really tell the history of Baltimore and hit on some really important points. So we'll talk about that, then we'll do Globe, then we can have a conversation if we so choose. And I'm just gonna keep track of time. Okay, so the first one is, okay, I guess actually my first question is, is everyone here from Baltimore? Okay, so you may know some of these places. So the first one is A.H. Hone Lithographers, which is over in East Baltimore. So A.H. Hone was founded in 1834. Mr. and Mrs. Weber and their nephew Augustus Hone moved from Germany to Baltimore, and with them they brought lithographic machinery, stones, and equipment with them and set up shop. And upon arriving, they founded what was then known the E. Weber and A. Hone Lithography Company. And after E. Weber's death, his nephew Augustus changed it to the A.H. Hone Lithography. And they were years of continuous operation, which gave them the title of the oldest lithographer in the United States. They were also one of, if not the largest. And their primary print production was medical. They did a lot of like medical illustrations, maps, packaging, but they developed this caustic printing technique where the lithographers could see what they were doing as they worked. They could see how the stones were developing, and it was they held a bunch of patents. So A.H. Hone held on until 1981, and then there was a failed merger, and they filed for bankruptcy and ultimately went out of business. But this space was over in East Baltimore. It's currently under redevelopment as a mixed use commercial community space, and they're doing kind of an incredible museum to honor the legacy of Hone lithography. There are litho stones like all over. The foundation of the building is like backfilled with litho stones, and they've done these really cool installations of like tiling them up on the wall so that people can see them and they're preserved. They also found, the building was mostly empty when the developers took over, but they found above the safe in what had previously been the art room, rolls of the original artwork that was used to make the paintings that were used in the pre-production before the stones. And they found rolls of all these beautiful medical illustrations, which were related to Hopkins, and things like parts of the cow. They were used as like maps for like butcher shops. They're really, really beautiful. And that collection is now at Johns Hopkins. So this is on East Biddle. It's kind of in a weird, like vacant landscape. And then there's this absolutely massive complex. It's something like 185,000 square feet. It's multiple buildings, and there's now various like creative agencies and community spaces. I think there's a bookstore in there too, or will be as part of the planning. So it's kind of had a lot of like start stops to the project, to my understanding. So this was A.H. Hone. The next one I have that is important to the mid-19th century is what's called the bird's eye view of Baltimore. This was done by a guy named E. Sanchez and Company. He originally had worked for Hone when it was the Weber and Hone lithography, and then he struck out on his own. Really significant. 12 panels. It's 10.5 feet by 5 feet, and it was produced in 12 sections of stone lithography. It was produced in 1869, and it is considered one of the best depictions of American cities ever produced. So they produced an aerial view of Baltimore without the ability to be up in a plane. At the time, hot air balloons would have been the only method. So the way they did it was they mapped out the landscape of the city at the time, ending at North Avenue on the top, Canton on the east. I think it's the Gwen Falls area on the right. And they sent out four artists over 3 years to sketch every building in Baltimore, and they painstakingly recreated them on these drawings. I think that they have the actual print at the Maryland Historical Society. So kind of an amazing piece of like documentation of Baltimore in the 1860s, but also it took like 3 years to complete. And he kind of went bankrupt on this project because he had invested so much time and money into it and really didn't make it back in the sales. I think so, but it was a pretty I don't think the run of it was very big to begin with, right? And like full color, it's a while. I wanna try and see the whole thing in real life. So we had Hone and Sanchez. They were German. There's a lot of German printing that happened in Baltimore, and we can't talk about that without talking about the linotype machine. Does everyone know what a linotype machine is? So a linotype machine is a series of casting to produce metal type. As the name implies, it produces lines of type for printing. So Gutenberg invents movable type in circa 1450, and there's no significant changes in how typesetting is done until 1886, when this machine is introduced on the market. It was invented by a man named Ottmar Mergenthaler, who was a German immigrant, and his shop was down where that Harris Teeter is now, in like Locust Point. In that area. So the linotype machine works. There's a series of matrices that are in here. The operator strikes keys here that causes those brass matrices to fall into a composing line, and then they are cast. There's about 45 pounds of liquid type metal heated to 550 degrees. So that casts these lines of type for printing. And Mergenthaler, as a watchmaker, invented this ingenious return system where these little brass matrices used for casting are then lifted back up, and they ride along a bar at the top, and it's a lock and key system. So the matrices have 7 teeth on either side, and as they hit their position on the bar, they fall back into this magazine. You only have 21 of each letter stacked up. So the letters are organized by frequency of use. So ETAIONSHRDLU are the 12 on this keyboard. They're also the first 12 letters to return. Uppercase Z will ride all the way to the end. It is an absolutely genius machine, and it revolutionized printing. Thomas Edison called it the 8th wonder of the world, because we go from talking about minutes per line to lines per minute. A good fast compositor was doing 6 lines a minute. And if you look at commercial printed materials at the turn of the century, it does a vertical climb because of the introduction of this machine. The Baltimore Sun had 75 of them. The New York Times had, I think, 100 plus. And they were in use until from 1886 the New York Times ceases production with them and goes to a cold type process. There is a really, really good video on YouTube if you ever want to go down a weird rabbit hole called Goodbye Eton Sherdlu. That's the ETAIONSHRDLU, Eton Sherdlu. where they documented the last day of the linotype in production. And there's a lot of compositors and printers who worked their entire lives and then retired. Mr. Ray, who is here at the Museum of Industry, worked in print shops throughout Washington and Baltimore for most of his career. He ran Loomis Printing, which was located a couple blocks from here on Washington Street. And up until his 90s, he was volunteering at the Museum of Industry on Saturdays, the machine, keeping it intact. I used to volunteer with him kind of before the pandemic. So the Germans in Baltimore love their linotypes, so they installed in the Zion Lutheran Church. There is an all of the stained glass there is honors German invention, and there is a linotype machine depicted in the stained glass of the Zion Lutheran Church. The crazy person that I am, on field trips, and I think the people at the church were like, "Wait, why are you here?" And I was like, "Because we're here to see the linotype machine." And then they got really excited and they were like, "Oh, do you want to come to our library? We have Mergenthaler's light fixtures in our library and some of his books." And so we had this very geeky afternoon of like talking to these very nice little church ladies about Ottmar Mergenthaler and the linotype. So another one, I pulled another one of the commercial printers in town was Schneidereichs and Sons. They were, Bill Schneidereit, who I've met, is I think he's a 5th or 6th generation letterpress printer. And his grandfather went to church at Zion Lutheran with Mergenthaler. And I pulled this because I found an article from the American Printer newspaper that denotes William Schneidereit, who I think is Bill Schneidereit's father, as the like highlight of their speaker for that event, talking about cost finding and estimating. High-end plant was located where Camden Yards is now, so I like to think that there's metal type under home plate, and that the printing lives on. There were also, there were hundreds of print shops in Baltimore, and that gets, oh, I forgot about this one. This is my other favorite. I had to put these in here. So these are from the collection at RIT, and they're amateur newspapers. So there was a lot of commercial printing going on, and as a result, there were a lot of amateur people, hobby printers, and young boys who aspired to go into the printing industry. It was a very stable job. Most of them were union printers, and so it was not uncommon for young boys to be gifted small tabletop printing presses as Christmas presents, and they could start, and they came as kind of pre-assembled kits, the press and the rollers and the ink and some paper and type, so you could newspapers and kind of start your own little business. And as a result, they used to make these amateur newspapers, and they're kind of funny and quippy, and they do all this like cool typesetting where they're setting things on verticals, and it's the amateur own, always on time, manuscripts wanted, advertisements inserted, everyone should sub, useful reading matter. And they were sort of the who and what of the neighborhood. And I've seen ones where they make like pretty funny little quips at each other, like better copywriting than whatever the other boys' newspaper was, or like better editing. I was at RIT, there's a woman there named Amelia Fontanelle, who's one of the curators, and I went up to visit her, and she was like, "Well, what do you want to see?" And I was like, "I don't know, show me your favorite things." And she was, "Oh, Allison, you're the worst. What am I supposed to do with that?" And so she pulls these out, and I had a friend of mine who's really interested in Baltimore history, and I think his head almost exploded because it's a really, like, I hadn't ever heard of these before. Like, we talk about big commercial printing, but there's also this whole subculture of amateur printing that was happening in the city as well. So that gets us to Globe Poster, which is my wheelhouse. So Globe was a poster printer and pretty quickly became one of the largest show card printers in the country. And they started out printing things like fairs and carnivals, boxing, racing, wrestling, big band, daredevil, hell sports, political signage, but their real claim to fame, both stylistically and in the clients they're printing for, happens in the 50s and 60s with R&B and rock and roll. So clients like James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, Ike and Tina Turner, B.B. King. If you name them, and we're black, there's a good chance, black musicians on tour, there's a really good chance that Globe was printing for them, not just in Baltimore, but nationally. Globe's footprint. But there was also that part of that collection is at the Hamilton Wood Type and Printing Museum. There was Globe St. Louis. There was Triangle Press, which was owned by the same family. There was the Shapiro family was a bit of a printing dynasty. They would move city to city, set up a print shop, and leave a brother or cousin behind to run the business and move on to the next one. I think that, so Duke Zimmerman is the grandson of Globe Poster, and him and his daughter have been doing research, and I think they've documented 14 connected printing shops across the country under like 16 different names. I might be plus or minus one on that. So they had a formula for running successful businesses, but I would like to make the statement that Globe Poster Baltimore was arguably the most famous because of the style of the posters they were making and the clients they were printing for. We got James Brown, Chicago got ice skating. I developed this really distinct styling black top that tells you the who, the where, the when. If you couldn't read it in 3 seconds or less, it wasn't a successful poster. And so Globe carries that forward into go-go music in DC. If you're not familiar with go-go, it's a mix of funk and Caribbean drum beats and rhythm and blues. It's very much an experience. It's not a 3-minute, it doesn't record like a 3-minute top 40s, but from the late 70s, 90s, go-go, while most Globe was being sustained by these go-go artists. And as a result, Globe became styling of the go-go sound. More is like sort of familiar with Globe Poster, but people who are native to DC love them some Globe Posters. And so bands like Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, EU, Rare Essence, Junkyard Band, they were performing every night of the week in all four, as well as early rap and hip hop, Fresh Prince, Jazzy Jeff, Two Live Crew, coming to Globe for these big vibrators. So Globe holds on till about 2011 when it becomes really clear that it's just not sustainable. They just can't do it anymore. And so there was a community that started with designers and letterpress printers here in town. My colleague, Mary Mashburn, who runs Typecast Press, was the ringleader of what became the Friends of Globe. And we rallied Micah to acquire the collection to keep it intact and to keep it here in Baltimore. And so what we acquired was not just a bunch of old posters. Those are great. We have about 8,400 individual posters. But what Micah was super excited about were so all of the beautiful wood type, ranging from super skinny to these big, I like to call them supermodels to sumo wrestlers and everything in between. And it's not 1 or 2 drawers, it's 6, 7, 8, 10 cases packed to the brim because Globe was a high volume commercial shop. Kat can attest to exactly how much type we have. And I'm really positive it's breeding because we keep finding more of it and we don't know where it goes. It's not the worst thing, but it's abundant. So the wood type, and it's mostly all this job shop Gothic. Hamilton wood type produced the high-end end grain, was buying like the IKEA version of it. It's a side grain. It's not as durable as the end grain stuff, and they were buying it from some like no marker place and maybe related, maybe not, called Globe wood type. But they bought a lot of it. So it's all of the wood type and then the hand-carved blocks that gave Globe its visual stylings. Letterpress is a very linear process, and Globe had this staff artist named Harry Knorr, who to the best of our knowledge was a sign painter by trade. And we can see that in a lot of the stylings, like that plus and on stage, that sort of brush script. But Harry was not painting with a brush, he was cutting with an X-Acto knife. So it's got these sharp edges to it. carved in a mix of wood and linoleum and this material called Ti-Pi. That's T-I-P-I, that's type high. So for anything to print letterpress, it has to be type high, which American and like Europe or UK type high is 0.918, which is just shy of an inch. So wood type, hand carved blocks, face plates, the face plates of the performers, all that stuff can work together. So here's a couple more of those like absolutely beautiful carved things: show and dance, band and show, and then there's the reverse. We've got show and band, and then there's band and show, because if there were multiple posters for the same area, they would mix it up so they weren't all exactly the same. More 3-ball fair stylings than you can imagine in every size, from like this big to billboard half sheet pieces. These super cool cars. This is my favorite one because the number on the doors are interchangeable, because the show promoters, different numbers were associated with different drivers, so they could they didn't have to produce whole new blocks for each thing. They could use them interchangeably. There are the ones we call the happy family. We call this one first wife and the other one second, or this is second wife, that's first wife. She's much more wholesome. Second wife, she's got a lot more eye makeup. Dad's wearing a hat because he's balding, but it's a later block because here we get into airplanes in the artwork. And Globe printed those. I love the Happy Family because it's something that Globe printed from the very beginning to the very end, from all letterpress to letterpress and screen printing, and at some point they were even running some offset stuff as well. So we have every iteration of the Happy Family. Here is, see what I mean? Like second wife, like she's got a lot of eyeshadow on. She is not as wholesome as first wife, who, you know, she's doing her thing. So I have derailed myself. So wood type, blocks, imagery. And this is one of my favorite parts of the collection. So we don't have a lot of those 50s era posters, but what we do have, and who we know, why we know who Globe was printing for, is that we have the face plates of all of the performers. And actually I brought little Marvin with me. So everyone gets to hold, everyone can like hold Marvin Gaye's head. So here's small Marvin. This guy's big Marvin. And so acts like these, Marvin, James Brown, we have their career documented in these faceplates, from young Marvin to poet Marvin, sexy Marvin, big Marvin, who was probably a really long repeat run because they splurged to get him made in copper. So here's big Marvin printed. So they're done with images. And a lot of them still print really, really well. We have about 8,500 of these blocks, and to give you a sense of what that looked like when we were packing, they all are. We were super fortunate that Globe had a really neurotic printer who worked for them, who pretty painstakingly, as they retired blocks, would go through and number, like they were alphabetized and roughly by year. So this is the one part of our collection that is cataloged, and we can find things because, in part because of that painstaking organization that somebody else did before us. So we moved 16 box trucks worth of stuff to Micah. Micah has an offsite warehouse where a lot of the stuff lives. We have a production shop, thank you, where we're still making new work, and I'll get to that in a second. And then all of the paper goods, nice facilities. So we brought all of that stuff. And then also the business process stuff. So things like sketches and invoicing that they were using. We make new. And in the middle is Bob Cicero. So Bob's dad started working there in 1934. He purchased the company from the original owners in 1975, and Bob and his brother business until the end. And we are super fortunate that when we brought Globe to, also brought Bob and his infinite wisdom about printing with us. Bob would walk in and like drop little tidbits of knowledge on you and then leave, and you're like, why have you never told me this before? And he's like, well, you never asked. My favorite one is Bob and I were in Tennessee, we were teaching, and we have all these beautiful hand-carved carnival numerals, and they're all stained red and blue. And so it tells us like what presses they were printing them on, and Bob goes, carnival poster, because carnies are superstitious. I was like, there you go, folks. Carnies are super. Just like, and then like walks out of the room to go do something else. So we're super fortunate that Bob teaches a letterpress class. I teach a bunch of workshops for graphic design. So we teach with it. We're working on archiving it so that eventually it'll be available in ways that people can use it for research and scholarship stuff. And we make new commercial work with it, which is probably my favorite part as I'm a designer. So we do a lot of voter participation stuff, but we also do new work for kind of a range of clients, from Hello Kitty to Smithsonian institutions to small nonprofits and galleries here in Baltimore. And I love this one because I love this James Brown poster. And when we were working for Hello Kitty, we got the opportunity to do some fun limited edition stuff for Hello Kitty Con. And I was like, this is my chance to like play on this poster and these shapes and make Kitty the star of the show. So inspired by all of that old of the archives work. So this is the Rhythm and Blues is screen printing. Press was done at MICA. And then the Flag House Museum is here in Baltimore. Here's more Kitty. We got to use those really great cars, and in true form, we swapped in some of the numbers to make it significant for her 40th anniversary, because Hello Kitty does not have birthdays, she has anniversaries. Some of you have probably seen this Trenton Doyle Hancock print that Trenton did with Globe for the 2012 Baltimore Print Fair. And then we've got Anne head to head with him. It's actually, this is the one poster I've been working on Globe since I was a student, and this is the one poster I did not work on. I was not formally working for Globe at the time, and I think I was out of the country. But more recently, we got to do New York Film Festival with John Waters, which was an absolutely fun project to work on. Mr. Waters is a super fun client, like super great to work with. And he walks in with an Ike and Tina Turner poster in hand and was like, I want this, but like with Martin Scorsese's head. And I was like, okay. So this is what I did at the beginning of the pandemic, was that when I was working from home, I was like trying to assemble the design for this poster. So we do, all of our posters are screen printed in our shop, and I have wonderful interns who help on the production stuff. And then we roll the black layer in traditional Globe form using letterpress. And to give it a view, there's kind of the corner. Our shop is not normally this clean, full caveat. Cat's the one that keeps me wrangled, but you know, this is the best case scenario. So we have a press here, and for scale, this press weighs about 5,500 pounds. Globe's presses weighed about 25,000 pounds a piece, and they had them on the 8th floor. And in one of their locations, they were in the Candler building downtown. And there's pictures of them taking these 25,000 pound presses out of the 8th floor, and somebody's standing underneath taking pictures. Super cool documentation, but also crazy person. So this is the shop we work in now at MICA. And I love these blocks that are kind of lined up on the top, and they say they're all of the different phrasings that they were using in carnival posters. My favorite is Cowboy Nick. But there's other ones like Whippet Racing and Fish Fry, Kitties, Carnival. My wall of wrenches, because Bob brings me endless numbers of old rusty wrenches, and we decided that we had to display them because they are actually useful also. But I hung this whole wall on a Friday, and I came in on Monday and a bunch of the wrenches were missing, and I was like, did they fall? What happened? And Bob comes in and he goes, here, I borrowed these. And then he walks out. It's like, okay. Useful, also pretty. And then we have fluorescent wallpaper because we've taken to dressing up our white walls. So that's a little bit of Globe Shop and where it is now. And then for the last bit of this, I've pulled more posters and elements from our collection that I think are just absolute gems and super kind of neat parts of cultural and printing history. So these two posters are significant because they are the earliest posters we have in our possession. Globe opens in 1929, so we've got circa 1932 and then 33 here. This one is for a series of shows in Baltimore, and I think the Winter Garden one is maybe in New York. But I like these posters because they're super contrasting to the later work Globe is making. When a lot of posters of this era kind of followed this template, you could order them out of a catalog. They're all letterpress. And then Globe really starts to define its own stylings using screen printing as the background with that letterpress on top. And Globe was the master of, we call them paragraphs. So whether they were the MC on the bottom or the headliners, everybody has their own place on the poster. So artists love them for that, in that nobody was forgotten. I love this Otis Redding one just because the lettering is so elegant and so many different stylings. I mean, he's got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 acts on there. It's also a significant poster because it's one of 4 times that Otis Redding appears at the Apollo Theater before his death. And then we get posters. This is another one where somebody came walking into the shop and he's like, I've got this poster. And I was like, hi, good morning. And this was for his band. Super quick poster where they were using wax paper cutouts to do the screen printing stencils. So Globe wasn't making burned screens for a lot of these. They were cutting out. The way they would work is they would set the wood type forms for printing, pull a proof, lay butcher's paper on top of it, cut out these cloud shapes, and then stick that butcher's paper to an open screen and then print through that. And you could get 500 impressions out of it before it fell apart. And then they could throw it on press and run the letterpress on top. So it was super quick, super dirty, out the door and on to the next one. The Bull Place one is an interesting poster because this is likely a reoccurring show at this venue. And there's no date on it, but there's white space that they could then put that in as they need to. We see that in a lot of posters, like this Vets Memorial where they called them imprints. So this was likely a touring show where Globe may have printed something like 5,000 of the artwork, and then just that last bit was added in as they needed 100 for Vets Memorial, 100 for the Apollo, 100 for Rhode Island Theater, wherever the shows were going. So it was a super efficient way to be able to do this work. And this one is a little bit unique in that it has a venue, but it doesn't have a date. These ones this is a later go-go poster in DC, but I love this one because we have the sketch that goes with it that shows the production notes along the bottom, 400, Saturn and Arc yellow, Thursday or Friday. Sometimes they say Rush, Hot Rush. They're written in red China marker. They're all circled up. And then they have notes about type sizes and layout. So the front of the house was designing the posters. Whoever's taking the orders is designing the posters and then sending it to the composition room to be assembled. So they would mark that stuff up. This one is super cool. This is a later one that was to offset Amberlith films. And it's got all of the percentages for the different colors, but the hand-drawn sketch and then what that styling looked like. Carnival was a little different than music posters in that you could like order them out of a brochure. So this was style number 206. What would a poster company be without some creepy magicians? But this big kind of rough sketched pencil pasted up with logos and fun and excitement. Chubby, again, this is one of those imprints where it's got the dates and the venues at the top, and then the ruby lith that was used to produce the plates for this run. And I love just these accents that come in here, these little like pizzazzy foot explosions. We've got James again. And I love this poster because we have the plates for it. So this poster is 35 by like 23, but there's also a smaller 14 by 22 size, which is this one. And this poster was this tie pie cut block. And I've only ever seen this in purple, but I have been told by Bob and confirmed by this block that it was also printed in green. So if anybody ever finds a green version of it, let me know because I am desperate to see the green. And then the hand carved blocks. This was a stock poster for James. So they had all of the pieces and components for it. I'm almost done. I've got a couple more kind of cool hand carved blocks. Fats, and then another version of it. I love Harry Knorr, who was doing all their artwork, and his different stylings, same name, different style. The students a lot because like it's just variations on a theme. These beautiful Johnny Taylor letterings, and again, this script with this blocky drop shadow with a knockout. Stevie Wonder. This one is super cool because we had seen when we were packing Globe to move, this Stevie was like sitting up on a shelf, and we were like, why is this cut out like this? This is really unusual for letterpress. Like round shapes aren't really a thing that work very well. And then we found that block and all of it made sense, and it was go find me the head of Stevie Wonder. And there's other ones. We have a Dionne Warwick where her hair is perfectly trimmed along the top to fit into her lettering block. And a little Rascals where they fit around the circle to make it a rectangle. I love this Isaac Hayes one because he's like Isaac the Dagger. But these blocks even then were expensive. And this one is super cool because we have the Isaac lettering Hayes here, but we also have this version of lettering that same block fits into. And it's just like the coolest like stretch shape. This one is one that somebody carved and then never printed. And I love it for the lettering styles that we have 4 or 5 different styles of lettering all coming together, routed out. And if you get up close on them, there's still the like pencil marks on the routing where it got printed, where it got cut, but never printed. It was not uncommon for carnival promoters to go out of business and then pop up like a couple weeks later under a new name because they had like, pissed somebody off or, done some shady things, I suppose. So printed, never used. This is probably my favorite poster in the top 5. I'll put it in my top 5. Carr's Beach is down in Southern Maryland. It was a really significant place because Carr's Beach and Sparrows Beach were 2 places during segregations for Black families to the day at the beach. And Carr's Beach had an amphitheater and was a stop on the Chitlin circuit. The traffic at Carr's Beach was backed up for 11 miles. And Globe printed a lot for Carr's Beach. I've seen other printing blocks for their styling, but this is the only intact poster that I've seen. It's a 3-color screen print, and out of it you get all of this all of these different colors. So it's yellow, blue, and pink. the yellow and the pink make the orange, the yellow and the blue make the green, the pink and the blue make the purple, and the skin tone is the build of all three. So just the coolest artwork. This one is another one that like somebody walked into the shop and was like, how much is this worth? And I was like, I don't know, I don't appraise posters. But I talked him into giving us one. He had like 10 of them before he sold the rest of them. And he had organized this, he was the head of the activities committee for his fraternity. So he had organized this dance in the, I think it's the late 50s. And so this was and I was like, this is a really interesting poster, because why would a fraternity have such an elaborate poster? It's got this rainbow roll background with the orange and the red and then the letterpress on top. And then I realized that it follows that imprint pattern. So this was a touring act, likely a touring act they hired for this event. And then they just put in the top and bottom content as they needed to. A couple more political guys, and then we'll move on. This one on the Peter Angelos for mayor poster is really significant. It is the first mixed race ticket to run in the state of Maryland. He didn't win, but here they all are presented very nicely. It's also an interesting poster because Peter Angelos is not the tallest person, but in this poster they have leveled the playing field. And I love this Cleveland Dargan one because he's just running in a local seat, but they've used an open red screen and delineated with tape and really used that white of the paper to their advantage. You can't have political posters without floating heads. Globe always had this idea that like, you don't need the whole body, you just need to know what their face looks like. So I just love Ralph and his floating head in the middle of the room. The most beautiful poster. And this woman's really interesting because she ran for clerk in Gary, Indiana. And I was like, why is this woman in Gary, Indiana ordering posters from Globe Baltimore? Like, surely there is a closer printer, and there is, because Tribune Show Print is in Indiana. But I started looking into her, and her name was Vivian Carter. She co-owned VJ Records, which was one of the first successful independently owned Black record labels. And she had like early staple singers and John T. Hooker, T. Early, I can't remember. And so she was likely getting posters for her artists when they were on tour. And when she went back to the people she knew and trusted. Big billboard pieces that were printed in sections, and there's often little cards that go with them to show you how they're hung. This particular one is screen printed I think this one is 8 panels. All right, almost the end of the line. We'll just cruise through these and then we can questions or whatnot. More carnival of different iterations. This is where Globe has moved into offset printing. Also, it is the third creepiest clown in our collection, like pretty high up there. Like, have you guys ever seen Broad City? And she's like, and someone tells her you should smile more. And this is like, every time I think of this, it's that you should smile more clip. Lots of fireman carnivals. This is like some 1950s naughty there. Like, is she wearing a shirt or is she not? I don't know. Bob has some pretty funny stories about the Catholic, like doing posters for Catholic church carnivals. And one time one went through where she had some very specifically placed buttons on her outfit. And the priest from the church was like, absolutely not. You need to reprint this. This is not a family. Needs to be more family friendly. Her buttons were just too scandalous. Like this one where she's got these nice booty highlights. Anyway, I love Drum Girl. She's kind of a fun representation of like what they could get away with in the 50s with carnivals. using the white of the paper to break up these lines. Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers in like 90 variations. These are 3 of my favorite, but we probably have 100 posters with this exact layout, different colorways, different nights of the week, which I think these are, as a designer, I love because it shows you all of these like variations on a style, and how quickly they could churn them out. And using older blocks after Harry retires from printing, they're using the live and the in-person in this more linear way. When Bob's brother Frank takes over handling all of the design, Frank is not the artist that Harry was, but he's trying to mimic some of those ideas and movements. And then Globe gets a computer and like all sorts of weird stuff starts happening. And this one in particular is my favorite, and I love to show it to my students because this is Globe's first effort at using a computer to design a poster. And Bob says it's amazing that they ever made another poster after that because they spent all day trying to get this thing to work. And what they didn't realize is that at the time you had to buy your fonts separate from your printer. So they were setting it on the computer screen. It was the Gothic typefaces they wanted, and it kept defaulting to American typewriter. So, and up close on these posters, it's like American typewriter doubled up with a drop day. Like it's just the worst image. But I love to show this to my students as the reminder that like not everything you make can be a masterpiece, that sometimes you just have to get it done. And then sometimes it gets better. So that is Globe poster in a nutshell. Does anyone have any, thank you. Does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts, anything you want me to go back to? So we live in the 1515 building next to printmaking. So printmaking has the whole building, and Globe lives next to printmaking, but we operate kind of as our own entity. And the way our shop is set up is Globe has a front letterpress shop, and then there's a bigger shop behind it that is connected that we teach in, that has 5 more presses and more work tables. And then going on the next wall over is the screen printing shop. So it's all connected so that we can do our production stuff.
Did you retain business records, print orders, stuff like that?
Yeah.
How extensive? I mean,
there's 500 boxes. There's a lot of stuff. Yeah, so not at all. There's some really amazing pieces. It's actually part of the reason that we ended up with all of the business records is that as when we were rallying the acquisition of Globe, Jim Sheridan from Hatch Show Print said, don't leave the business records behind, because it wasn't really originally on our radar as something that we needed. And Jim was like, my biggest regret is we moved and we threw out the business records. Don't throw them out. So we took anything that Bob was going to let us take, minus the newest stuff that had people's personally identified, like personal information on them. We kept everything. And we have, going back to like the beginning, the ledgers that they were using to record the jobs and the payments. But there's also some really important information because there's the buying receipts for things like the ink. So it's helpful when we get to that archiving space to know exactly what they were buying. So we can, if we need to do triage on things, eventually we'll be able to, find that information. We're not guessing.
I guess you digitize it at some point if you have the ability.
That's the goal. We are working on applying next time the rounds of digitization grants come up. We anticipate putting an application forward to get the bulk of the material, which will allow us to get the bulk of the materials. Our biggest concern is those face plates because there's some conservation issues with them, and we want to make sure that all of that stuff gets documented before it really becomes the point where it erodes and we can't save it. So it's a massive undertaking. It will be a multi-year project.
You looked into archiving, collecting images of the entire scope of whatever comes up? Is that part of your like the posters that Globe has produced over the years? Are you interested in gathering that? Or any kind of,
I keep a digital, like we don't have a complete record of posters. I keep a digital folder of like when I find things on the internet or people send me stuff. Sometimes people will be like, hey, look at this thing I found in my wall. And so I try to keep digital records as best as possible of anything that it has existed of Globe.
I'm at the center of the collector's market of rock and roll posters.
Yeah.
The most coveted.
Yeah.
Like the 60s rock and roll Stones. Like, I can't buy one for $200,000.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just saying that through the collector's world, I get images. I know where these main collectors are, and I think I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I have seen a car speech with event information.
I would love to go deep down this rabbit. Yeah, because I'm trying to assemble, like, especially for teaching purposes, like we don't have everything, and I'm never gonna own everything because we can't afford it. But I want to have those records of its existence.
It's super rare, and the collectors have more access to it than the institutions. So
yeah,
I know
brilliant.
That's wild. I mean, again, it's top level stuff.
Yeah, I know, and that old stuff is harder and harder to come by as it makes its way into private.
The 70s, like I mean, the late 60s, like the Hendrix, the Zeppelin, Stones are like they're probably $250,000 pieces right now.
Yeah.
Like, not to sully your work with
No, I understand what you mean. That is the hope. So there is a documentary in the works. So there's a guy named John Lewis who's a writer. He lives out on the Eastern Shore. He used to be the assistant director at AVAM, and he's a writer. He's written for Rolling Stone and Baltimore Magazine, and he's on the tail end of a film about Globe. And John is incredibly special. He's longtime friends with the Cicero family, and he started making this documentary like 15 years ago about Globe when it was this really cool poster company that died, and it was this 25-minute short. And then Micah, and in the middle of filming all of this, Micah steps in to buy the collection, and so he's like, "Well, now we have a feature-length film." But he has incredible footage because he has Solomon Burke. He has what is probably the last interview with Chuck Brown before he passed away. I think John did the interview, and he passed away like 6 weeks later. So he's got John Waters talking about Globe, and more importantly to the Cicero family, he has Bob's dad, Joe, who died in the early 2000s. And so John is at the tail end of this. And so hopefully in the next year, this thing will be alive and public, and we're going to have a grand old party. And then the book stuff, the goal is to get the book stuff, is to do some kind of book at some point. We want to get the collection digitized first, because in all honesty, like, we don't have a great idea of what we even have. And we want to know what we have, so we make sure we can tell the best story. So it's all in the works. So yeah, it's really cool stuff, I think. Maybe I'm biased. And it's neat that, like, I mean, Baltimore had such a rich printing history, and I think that Globe is just like the super fun, I don't know, icing on the cake. Yeah. All the time. And posters were a really important tool for communication, because they didn't have some of the barriers to them that radio and newspapers would have had, especially if you were a person of color. You could hang posters, and there wasn't really anybody that was going to stop you from doing it in the same way that getting on the radio or running an ad in the newspaper. And I think Globe is interesting because it was run by a Jewish family and then an Italian family. and they were printing for predominantly Black clients. So it is probably, I've met people who have said that Globe is like a hidden treasure and that it is probably one of the best documentations of like African-American entertainment history, because it has all of these music posters, even going back to some of the darker stuff like the minstrel shows. And then like theater posters. And I can't remember what they're called, but they're like the teaching ones that are like, Mama, I'm Sorry. They were like these like plays that have like life lesson kind of things on them, and gospel posters. I always kind of forget that gospel was a pretty big genre for Globe. And those ones are interesting because they're always like a million names on them. So.
Are you familiar with Murray Print Shop that was in Oakland? They were an African American owned company.
Yeah.
So they,
We can keep talking.
Let me use